if you're just joining us, by the way, our guest is Brazil-based Winnie Overbeek, and we are discussing the impact of COVID-19, but also deforestation, the impact on indigenous communities is where we are right now. And Winnie Overbeek, just the relationship then, because there is some controversy about people living in forests, and even in some cases blaming people who live in forests for deforestation or somehow harming the forest, which to me doesn't seem to make sense, because if you live in the forest, it seems as though you do want to preserve this. But this is happening not only in the Amazon, but also on the continent of Africa and also Asia. And you have the developments of these mega tree plantations. I was reading about one that was funded by Norway, maybe an NGO or some such in Norway, in Tanzania in particular. Tell us, just make those connections for us and the problems with these tree plantations and the environment, but also of people living in the forest and their right to live in the forest. Winnie Overbeek.
Yeah. Well, this is an interesting question in times of COVID-19, and what we see a sort of bigger discussion about the need to protect forests, the need to the need to stop deforestation because of a supposed relationship between increased deforestation and an increased risk of these virus outbreaks that we are experimenting now with COVID-19. And there is this relation, of course, because the virus that we have, the COVID-19, it's coming from animals, and animals, wild animals, they inhabit forests. But at the same time, we are very concerned. It's good to investigate this kind of thing, but what we are most concerned about is how it's being used now. And if we look at all the forest areas, if you look at the situation of forest-dependent peoples, we are very concerned because this year, 2020, the big international conservation NGOs that supposedly are concerned about the protection of forests, they call this a super year, for the forest, for nature. Because after the climate agreement, this big agreement that was signed in Paris in 2015 to supposedly combat climate change, there was in 2017 signed a global deal for nature to complement the Paris Agreement. And what these big conservation NGOs propose is to protect half of the world's and the world's surface, so the land and the oceans, as protected areas. And this year we would have big conferences about biodiversity, about forest, and they would try to approve that by 2030, 30% of the world's land and oceans would be protected areas. There are two problems here, and I come back to COVID-19 afterwards to make the relations clear. One is that the analysis is actually wrong because, if you talk about creating protected areas, you are looking for areas that are forest areas, and where there are forests in the world, and that is our experience of 35 years of, supporting communities that depend on forests. Where we have forests in the world is because there are communities, and as you say yourself, they are not interested to destroy the forest. They are there because they need the forest. It's part of their life space. It's part of their livelihood, and they have no interest at all to destroy it. But what you see happening in this, in this fever of creating more protected areas, and nowadays, because of COVID-19 and the supposed relation, between forest destruction and the new coronavirus, these organizations somehow trying to take advantage of this to push for more protected areas where they are looking for forest areas and they are blaming most often the communities who are there for the deforestation that is happening. And they practice some deforestation, but it's a traditional activity. And at the same time, these big conservation NGOs, they are, they have strong relations with big corporations that are actually responsible for the big mining, the big logging, the big soya plantations in the Amazon, the big meat production. And these are the real causes of deforestation, with a number of underlying causes, very complex underlying causes related to our whole economic globalized system. So that is a little bit the main thing we are concerned about at this moment, and it's this vision of protected areas without people. It's a very colonial view. It has a very strong aspect of environmental racism, and it comes from this national park idea that actually was born in the U.S. I think years ago. With the good savage, the indigenous person who can stay there but don't touch nature. Nature is there to observe for the ecotourism. So you see, for example, in these protected areas, luxury resorts for people to observe nature. In our, Western tradition of separating nature from people, we take a distance, we look at it. It's very different from the forest-dependent people who are part of the forest. They actually don't have really, in many indigenous languages in the Amazon, they don't have a name for forest because they cannot separate forest from themselves. So that's a very big concern. At the same time, that a very important source of these virus outbreaks that can lead to pandemics is actually industrial animal farming, industrial livestock farming, which is also a cause of deforestation, which needs a lot of food inputs like soy, which is destroying forest. And I don't see much debate about that, it's about this huge animal farms, a lot of them in the U.S., a lot of them in China, a lot of them in Europe, and a lot of them in Brazil too. Thousands and thousands of pigs and other animals for industrial processing and meat production. And they are like also a very important source of virus outbreaks, but I don't see a debate to change that. What I see is a lot of discussion that we need to protect more forest, we need to conserve more, but it's very important if we do that to make a good analysis what is causing deforestation. They are not the people, not the indigenous people in the Amazon and other communities living with the forest. Are there different causes? At the same time, if we want to protect forests, we should do it together with the people on the ground. And that is what we have been trying to work for 35 years now. But it seems that it's more than needed to do this discussion, public discussion nowadays, with the threats coming and COVID-19 actually, being used or abused as an argument to create more of these protected areas. Because for people, it's very bad if their forests get destroyed by a mining company, but it's also very bad for them if they cannot access anymore their forest where they depend on for their rituals, for their food, for their medicine, for many things. So yeah. I think I leave it for now because we can talk a long time around this. Yeah.
We could, and we'll likely need to carve out a kind of a part 2 in-depth discussion with you, Winnie Overbeek. This discussion is really so important because, as far as I'm concerned, there does need to be a total change of priorities, where the caring of people, but also the caring of the environment are really the priorities. And I loved what you said about indigenous people in the Amazon not having a word for forests and not being able to separate the forest from themselves, and contrast that with a kind of a colonial view, even even Western environmentalists, as you say, wanting to observe nature rather than live in nature. And just quickly, when the fires were happening in Australia last year, those devastating fires, I did speak with someone there and really took a look at the way Aboriginal people, Indigenous people in Australia have dealt with fires, of actually starting fires as part of helping to control growth, etc., but doing it in a sustainable way. And they were seeing that the areas that use the traditional Indigenous way of burn, right, as a method of actually environmental protection, didn't experience the massive out of control fires in other areas. So that really shows, as you say, the importance of really working with Indigenous people and respecting and looking at those ways and realizing that it really is a totally different mindset, that you are part of nature, you live with nature and in nature, as opposed to either just observing nature on the one hand or abusing nature on the other hand.